When Giorgia Meloni was 15 years old, she joined a political party founded by supporters of Benito Mussolini. She called Mussolini a good politician who did everything for Italy. She rose through the ranks of Italy's post-fascist movement for the next 3 decades, and in October 2022, she became Prime Minister of Italy, the leader of the world's 8th largest economy, a founding member of the European Union, a core NATO ally. The story of how she got there is not a story about fascism returning to Europe. It is a story about a political system that lost the trust of its voters, and a woman who understood that better than anyone else. She is now one of the longest-serving leaders in the G7, and one of the most watched figures in a Europe that is redefining itself in real time. Giorgia Meloni is the Prime Minister of Italy, in office since October 2022, one of the longest-serving current leaders in the G7. The first woman ever to hold the office in Italian history, she leads Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, a party she co-founded in 2012 from the remnants of Italy's post-fascist movement. Italy is the 3rd largest economy in the Eurozone, a founding member of the European Union, and a core NATO ally, with strategic Mediterranean coastline at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Meloni governs at a moment when Europe is under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The war in Ukraine has forced a fundamental rethink of European defense and security. The rise of far-right parties across the continent is reshaping the political landscape in France, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands. The relationship between national sovereignty and European integration is being contested more openly than at any point since the EU's founding. Meloni is not a spectator in that debate. She is one of its central figures. Giorgia Meloni was born in Rome in 1977. She grew up in Garbatella, a working-class neighborhood in the south of the city. Her father left the family when she was a child. She was raised by her mother with little money and no political connections. At 15, she joined the youth wing of the MSI, the Italian social movement, a party founded in 1946 by supporters of Mussolini's regime. The MSI was the only political home that felt like it was speaking to people like her, people who felt left behind and ignored by the comfortable Italian establishment. She rose quickly. By 21, provincial councillor; by 29, member of parliament; by 31, Italy's youngest minister in post-war history, appointed to the youth portfolio in Berlusconi's government in 2008. 2 turning points defined her path to the top. First, her decision in 2012 to leave the mainstream right coalition and found Fratelli d'Italia as an independent force, a gamble that nearly destroyed her politically. Second, the collapse of every other Italian political force between 2018 and 2022, which left her as the last credible option standing. Since 2000, Italy has had 14 different prime ministers. Governments collapsed over budget disputes, coalition breakdowns, and corruption scandals. The mainstream parties lost the trust of the electorate. Young Italians left the country in record numbers. Meloni filled that vacuum with 3 things that most Italian politicians of her generation lacked. The first is ideological consistency. While other parties shifted positions and reinvented themselves every electoral cycle, Meloni stayed the same. God, family, homeland, sovereignty over supranational institutions, controlled immigration, protection of Italian identity. In a landscape defined by political opportunism, consistency became credibility. Voters knew exactly what they were choosing. The second is the strategic moderation of her governing style without abandoning her political base. When she became prime minister in 2022, European markets reacted with concern. The spread between Italian and German bond yields spiked. Investors feared a repeat of the 2011 debt crisis. Meloni responded with reassurance. She kept Italy in the EU and in NATO. She supported Ukraine. She appointed a technocratic finance minister. Italy's fiscal deficit fell from 8.1% in 2022 to 3.4% in 2024. The market stabilized. At the same time, her government continued the immigration crackdowns, LGBTQ+ restrictions, and NGO regulations that defined her campaign. She governed more cautiously on economics than her rhetoric had suggested. but did not change course on the social and political agenda her voters had elected her for. The third is her positioning within Europe itself. Meloni leads the largest far-right government in the European Union, but she has not governed as a Eurosceptic in the traditional sense. She has not threatened to leave the EU. She has not blocked EU budgets. She has not aligned with Orban's systematic obstruction of EU decisions. Instead, she has pursued a different strategy, pushing for a more sovereignty-friendly EU from within the institution, rather than attacking it from outside. She has built relationships with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, with whom she has cooperated on migration policy and the EU's external border strategy. She has positioned Italy as a serious voice on Mediterranean security, African migration routes, and European energy independence, and she has used Italy's geographic position as a bridge between Northern Europe and the African and Middle Eastern regions that are central to Europe's migration and energy challenges. That positioning has given her influence in Brussels that goes beyond what Italy's current economic weight would suggest. Meloni's most significant global impact is not bilateral, it is structural. She is the most prominent leader of the European far right who has chosen to work within European institutions rather than against them. That choice has consequences for the entire continent. On one side, it has given the European far right a degree of institutional legitimacy it did not previously have. Meloni's presence at EU summits, her cooperation with von der Leyen, her support for Ukraine, all of these have normalized a political movement that, a decade ago, was largely excluded from mainstream European governance. On the other side, it has pulled EU policy in directions it would not otherwise have gone. The EU's migration policy has hardened significantly since Meloni came to power. Offshore processing, external border enforcement, and cooperation with North African governments on migration containment are now mainstream EU positions that Meloni has actively shaped. On Ukraine, Italy has maintained consistent support for Kyiv under Meloni's government. She has not wavered on EU sanctions against Russia. She has not aligned with Orban's pro-Russian positions. On European defense, as NATO members have increased defense spending in response to the war in Ukraine, Italy has remained below NATO targets. That gap between Meloni's strong rhetorical support for NATO and Italy's actual defense investment is a tension that has not been resolved. On the transatlantic relationship, Meloni has navigated the shift in U.S. foreign policy under the second Trump administration more effectively than most European leaders. But in early 2026, Italy's foreign policy priorities diverged clearly from Washington's. Italy refused U.S. military access to the Sigonella Air Base in Sicily for operations related to the Iran conflict, determining the request fell outside existing bilateral agreements. Italy suspended its defense cooperation agreement with Israel after Israeli forces fired warning shots at an Italian UN peacekeepers convoy in Lebanon, and Meloni publicly criticized Trump after his attack on Pope Leo XIV. Taken together, these decisions reflect a consistent underlying principle in Meloni's foreign policy. Italy's national interests and its European commitments take precedence over bilateral alignment with Washington. That is a meaningful position for a leader who built part of her international profile on her relationship with the American right. On immigration, Meloni's central campaign promise was to stop illegal immigration. In 2025, migrant arrivals to Italy rose by nearly 40%. Her government's response has included systematic legal action against NGO rescue ships in the Mediterranean, fining and delaying vessels for saving people from drowning. Italy established offshore detention facilities in Albania. Italian courts have repeatedly ruled these arrangements unlawful, finding that conditions and screening procedures fail to meet basic human rights standards. In a separate incident, Meloni's government released a Libyan militia commander wanted by the International Criminal Court. Critics described it as a quid pro quo for Libyan cooperation on migration enforcement. Releasing an ICC wanted individual in exchange for border assistance is a violation of Italy's international legal obligations. On LGBTQ+ rights, in October 2024, Italy passed a law criminalizing Italian citizens who travel abroad for surrogacy. The law extends Italian state jurisdiction beyond its own borders to regulate the private reproductive decisions of its citizens. On the judiciary, in March 2026, Meloni's government held a referendum on a judicial reform that would have separated judges' and prosecutors' careers, split the High Council of the Judiciary, and reduced its independence from the executive. On March 22nd and 23rd, 2026, 53 to 55% of Italians voted no. Meloni accepted the result, did not resign, and confirmed she would continue governing. Meloni's political direction is clear, and voters knew what they were electing. When her judicial reform failed to win a majority, she accepted the result and moved on. That is democratic governance functioning as it should. On her political roots, Meloni joined a post-fascist party at 15. She praised Mussolini as a teenager. Fratelli d'Italia still carries the flame, a direct reference to Mussolini's tomb in its party logo. As prime minister, she has condemned the Holocaust and stated that the far right has consigned fascism to history. She has not explicitly condemned Mussolini. She has not formally renounced the movement that formed her. She is not governing as a fascist. But her refusal to make a clean break with that political heritage remains a relevant fact for understanding the movement she leads. There is a phrase in Italian politics, trasformismo, the art of changing your positions, your alliances, and your image while maintaining your grip on power. Meloni has done it more effectively than anyone in her generation. From post-fascist youth activist to G7 leader, from Eurosceptic to a pragmatic operator within European institutions, from political outsider to the most stable Italian prime minister in a generation. In March 2026, Italian voters rejected her judicial reform. In April 2026, she prioritized Italy's European commitments over her relationship with Washington. Both moments reflect the same underlying reality. Meloni operates within the boundaries of democratic governance, and within the framework of European institutions, she pushes those boundaries. But when they hold, she respects them. If this video made you think differently about how the far right rises, what happens when mainstream politics loses the trust of its people, and why the health of a democracy depends less on its leaders than on the citizens who hold them accountable, subscribe to Power and Persona. New episodes every week. We'll see you in the next one.